Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you would mind hitting the like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I appreciate it. I also love it if you leave a comment. I appreciate hearing things like constructive criticism, ideas for videos. I also like to hear how people do things at home because everybody does things a little different. It's always good to learn new ways to do things, so tell me how you do things differently. So a long time ago, probably about 2 years ago, I did a video and called it a wobble ring, and it involved having three different pieces. I think I used 14 gauge square to make little simple bands, and then I kind of made them wavy and soldered them together so they had kind of a pleasing pattern. And it seemed like a popular video, and I've always wondered how they would come out looking if you put some stones on there as well. So I thought today I was going to do kind of a stone wobble ring and see how it turns out. But we'll give that a try today. Before we get started, I'd like to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patreon are my core group of supporters, and I really appreciate their support. Not only do they help me financially, but they've created this really nice community over there, and I appreciate all of the great interactions that they have with each other and all of the advice they've given me, and I hope they're getting as much from it as I am from them. So thank you guys, I appreciate that. The second group of people are my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 13,500, I believe. I even got to meet a couple of subscribers over the past few weekends at shows, so that was nice to meet you. I appreciate the really nice comments that you leave. Some of those are very touching, and it helps me to know that you're getting something out of these videos. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate the nice financial contributions like the Buy Me a Coffee and the Super Thanks. Those help out with the cost of silver right now, and I appreciate it. With those things being said, let's get started on this stone wobble ring. We'll see how it turns out. This is one of my design idea books. There's a number of different designs on my merch store. I like them to draw up sketches before I do my projects. It helps me to get a better outcome usually. And on the recent ones that we've offered on the merch store, they have different conversion charts on the back. This one is fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters, and I find that super useful. So check those out. Let's see, here's my sketch for the day. Oh, they also have this nice little grid background. It helps me to keep things kind of symmetrical, as I'm not that great at freehand drawing. So here's what I had in mind today. I have three little cabochons that are Tanzanites, and they're about 4 millimeters. Here's one of them, and they're real pretty in person. I hope they photograph well, but we'll see. So the wobble ring is basically three pieces of square wire like this, and I'm going to cut them to the length that hopefully will get them close to about a size 9. That's what I measured this for here. And in order to achieve a size 9, since we have those wobbles going on there, we're going to have to make it a little bit longer, so I'm going to kind of make an estimate about how long to make them, and we'll just kind of go from there. If it comes out not to be quite a 9 or something, that's okay on this one, because it'll just go into my general inventory, and somebody will find one a size that fits, but you could probably calculate exactly how that works. But so I think our first thing to do is make a bezel for this and the other two stones, and then we'll come back and we'll make some bands, and then we'll start shaping them and soldering it all together. I'm going to use 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip, but I'm going to cut it way shorter, and I'm going to use 28 gauge, which is I think 0.33 millimeters if I remember right. Instead of 14 on these, I'm going to use 16 gauge, so it's a little bit more fine looking. And that's 1.3 millimeters if you're overseas. And so I think, let's get started. Oh, I'm going to use for the back of the bezels, I'm going to use 26 gauge sheet, which is 0.41 millimeters. So let's make a bezel for this, and I'll probably do the other two off camera so you don't have to watch me make the same thing over and over again. But then we'll come back and we'll do the bands. So this was 3/16 inch tall, but now I've cut it down a little bit shorter, and I'll probably have to file it shorter yet when I get ready to set the stones, because these are pretty small stones. So let's get the end nice and flat. When you're Doing shows is pretty tiring sometimes, especially once you start to get a little older. And I looked at myself on camera today, and I have big bags under my eyes. So I'm a little tired from the past several weekends. It's been a busy few weeks. So I apologize for my little bit rough looking face right now. What's the saying? They say getting old isn't for wimps. Doing the shows themselves isn't that bad. It's the setting up and tearing down and, you know, preparing in advance, making sure everything's polished up, and all of your stuff is labeled and priced. I think when you're doing this and you're selling things, it takes at least as much work to sell stuff as it does to make it, probably more, which is not as fun as making it, of course. So, but it is nice to do shows because you get to see people you haven't seen for a year or so. I have some customers who come back every year, and it's nice to see them. Set this to the side so I don't knock it off the table somewhere. If you've never been to my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder and a liquid flux that I generally dribble on or spray on depending upon the situation. My torch is a Silversmith model, which is their acetylene air torch, and it's a great torch for silversmithing. I love it. So let's get this soldered. I already have a little bit of solder over here, I think, so let's get it fluxed and we'll get it soldered. Don't need a huge piece for this one. Pretty small bezel. Bezels don't take very long to solder if you're new to this. They also don't take very long to melt if you leave the torch on there too long. So if you're having that problem, paying real close attention to when the solder flows and getting the heat off immediately after that completely flows is one of those tricks you need to learn at the beginning. If you leave the heat too long, it has a tendency to soften the metal and the bezel will start to slump and pull apart. You have a badly soldered bezel usually. I usually tell people to make about 30 bezels before they get too discouraged because it takes a while to kind of get the hang of it. It's just kind of an arbitrary number, but it seems about the number that I made before they started to become sort of routine for just your basic bezels. I'm just kind of reshaping it back into the shape of the stone. So we did well on size, so I think we're good with that. Let's cut a little piece of sheet. Like I said, I'm going to use some 26 gauge sheet. We had a bit of a rainstorm on Saturday at the show. It was short but intense. I don't mind a little rain. The only thing is it clears a lot of the customers out and they don't necessarily come back. So what I don't like at shows is heavy wind. So that way you're, even when you have your tent weighted down pretty well, sometimes it can really take out your displays and things like that. And that's always no fun. Alright, I'm going to put a little bit of solder on the inside of these after I flux it. Interestingly, if you watched the Saturday's video that I pre-scheduled in advance of doing the show, it was kind of an Art Deco-y looking turquoise pendant, and that was one of the very first things I sold at the show. Alright, I'm just going to trim off the excess here. I'm just filing off the excess. One thing you need to remember with bezels is you want it to be kind of so there's no lip left, it's flush on the bottom. But you also don't want to accidentally slide up and hit the top of the bezel up here where it's, especially if you're using thin bezel like this. This is 28 gauge, which is pretty thin. And if you start hitting the side of that, it starts to make it so thin that it becomes like fragile and easily tearable. So easy to tear, easily tearable. Not terrible, but terrible. Okay, so that one's ready. So I'm going to make 2 more of those and then I'll be right back. So I got the 3 bezels made here. I'm going to set those to the side for a minute so don't lose them. And I also have some 16 gauge square wire, and I don't have enough in this piece, so I pulled a little bit more. I don't generally buy 16 gauge square. I buy 14 and then I pull it through a draw plate when I need it. So I'm gonna, this is, like I said, that's about a size 9, so I'm gonna add about 3/8 of an inch, or what would that be? That would be about 7 or 8 millimeters. See how that works. Cut them all the same. Super handy to have a draw plate for when you run out of a particular type of stock that you need. So I oftentimes, you know, as long as you have a little bit bigger stuff, you can always make a little smaller stuff. Okay, I'm going to file the ends of these and turn these all into bands. See how close we are on size. Sometimes I cut them a little imprecisely. I think that's probably close enough. Alright, so I'm going to make these into bands by soldering them into shape. But first I'm going to get them soldered and then we'll shape them, I should say. I usually make them into U's like this. let's get these two ends together nicely. You certainly wouldn't have to use square wire or 16 gauge. You could do it in a different size. I think if you get much smaller though, it's going to be a little flimsy. And if you get too much bigger, it might look clunky. So 16 or 14 probably is your best bet on something like this. But it's always fun to experiment because maybe if you try something else, it'll create kind of a cool look too. I'm assuming this one will have a cool look. I guess we'll find out. I wanted to thank all of the people who've purchased my recent ebook, which is a guide to my 2023 videos. It's got a picture of my sketch from each of the videos in it, as well as a final product picture, or products if there's more than one. It's got a list of materials you need to make it, difficulty rating, some notes I made about it, like, you know, would there have been an easier way to do things once I had finished it, you know, and thought about it, or are there some cool variations you might do, or you know, just particular problems I had and what I might suggest to solve them, those kinds of things, as well as a link right to the video itself. So it's kind of a nice way to have a bunch of projects right near at hand. So check it out if you're interested. I'll put a link up there. These I'm going to pick solder, and I'll show you and then I'll tell you about it. You wouldn't have to. You could just lay a piece of solder across the gap here. However, pick soldering itself offers a nice way, once you kind of mastered it, to really precisely put exactly the amount of solder that you want into the place where you want it, without adding a lot of excess, you know. I made a rookie mistake there. I accidentally got it too hot on one side of the gap and the other side wasn't to the flow temperature yet, and so it just jumped on me. See, like that. It's going to be one of those days. So pick soldering is where you pick up a little bit of solder on the end of the pick like that. You heat up the piece to the soldering temperature, or thereabouts, and then you touch it where you want it to go, and it should just jump right on there like that. I have a good video about that if you're interested. It's one of those skills that really moves you up a notch, I think, because it allows you to really precisely solder places that are hard to position bits of solder on. A lot of people use paste, and that works too. That's kind of a nice option. So I'm going to shape these first. And remember, these are going to be quite a bit bigger than a 9 because I'm going to wobble them. If I cut it way too big, I might cut them shorter. We'll see. If you want, you could use, these are nylon jawed pliers. These ones are a little beat up, so I put some tape on them. But let's kind of bend it so it's got some wobbles in it. I think I'm going to have to cut them shorter because this is, even when I make pretty wide bends like that, it's not shortening it that much. Oh yeah, that's way too big. So, let's do this. Cut it at the solder joint. Let's cut off about the same amount extra that we added and see how close we get. I guess this is small enough when we shape it on the mandrel, it may stretch a little bit anyway, so maybe that's just the way to go. Let's just cut that off about there. I'm going to straighten him back out. Okay, I'm just going to file and resolder those again. I'll be right back. Let's give that another try with some smaller rings. I'm not sure why I measured them so big, but alright, let's do that. I didn't probably explain, but the reason I'm using the nylon jawed pliers is because I'm going to be doing quite a bit of playing with the bends on these in order to get them to line up how I want them to. And I don't want them to be perfectly symmetrical, but I do want to be able to get the junctures to be kind of where I want them to be. But I do like the curves to be kind of smooth. It's kind of nice. Let's see what we can do here. So far I'm liking that. May have to do a little adjusting, but maybe I should get these two soldered together first and then do the third one. That's pretty close. I'm going to make a mark across them so I get them lined up the way I want. As soon as I set them down, they'll be misaligned. I won't have them how I want, so let's put a line right there. That way I can find again exactly how I had them. If they move. So you could sweat a little bit of solder on the inside of the bumps on one of the rings and then set it on there and then just heat the whole thing until it flows. That would work. I'm going to just pick it, I think, myself. Anytime you're heating stuff like this, the bottom piece is going to be harder to get up to temperature than the top because you're heating from above with the flame. So I usually spend a little more time on the bottom. It's easier to get things up to temperature then at about the right time. See, like that one, I should have heated the bottom a little more first. Okay, so now I'm just going to put it on the ring mandrel and shape it up a little bit. And we'll go from there. So I think for the 3 bezels here, I kind of filed the edge flat so it was nice and even. I'm going to put one here, one right here, and one right here where they come together. And to do that, I think probably the best bet would be to sweat a little bit of solder on the back of these bezels, so there's already some solder where it needs to be. So let's cut some solder and do that. So chances are good there's enough solder there anyway to stick these to it, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So that looks pretty good. Most of the mass is in the band on this one, plus I have the third hand here which soaks up a lot of heat. So mostly you're going to heat the bottom part. I saw that drop a little bit, so I think it's over there. Let's add one over here. Well, I'm kind of clustered together a little bit, so I'm going to put it on a little bit to that side of the join. We're on there. See if we can do this without that other one falling off. Luckily, the surface tension of the solder as a liquid is usually enough to hold it on unless you have it really in an extreme position. Oops. I'm going to let that pickle for a while, and then I'm going to file these bezels quite a bit shorter, polish it, and then I'll come back and I'll set at least one of the stones in front of you so that you can see how to do that. So I set these 2 stones already and got this thing all polished up. So let's set this final one. And I do this a little differently than some. I use the flat side of my chain nose pliers as the bezel pusher. I'm just going to kind of push that up against the edge of the stone. And start kind of curving it over the top. Once you feel like it's tight against the stone, then I'm going to use the rounded outer part here to burnish. So I'm going to rub that top edge with some force. So I'll get that cleaned up a little bit more with the Dremel and a fine polishing wheel at the top of the bezel, and then I'll get some better pictures and we'll call it a night. Well, that was a stone wobble ring. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. And I'd also love it if you take a moment and check out some of my other videos. I have 360 some now, and So there's lots of content there at all different levels, and I think no matter which level you're at, you might find something useful. So check it out, subscribe to my channel, and come back and visit again. The last thing is check out the video description down below for some relevant links. There's a link to my ebook, which I just published recently, which is a guide to 2023's video tutorials. I think it's a handy way to have a whole bunch of good projects right at your fingertips. There's a link to my merch store where you can get those nice design idea books, which I find pretty helpful. There's a link to my Patreon if you want to check out that community and find out how to become involved there, and some other important links. So check those out and come back to visit. Take care. Happy silversmithing.